me first talk about RAC. So that conditioned place preference that I talked about, do you spend time in the striped room where you get morphine, or do you spend time in the polka dot room where you get saline? When you put electrical current in parts of the brain, the striatum, or the nucleus accumbens, in a rat, you can prevent the development of preference for spending time in the room where they got the morphine. Similarly, to rats who learn how to self-administer cocaine, and then they stop, and you give them that injection once, and they go back to pushing the button again. If you give them electrical current, you can prevent that, where they won't, even though you just gave them a shot of cocaine, they don't go back to pushing the button to give themselves even more cocaine. You can also block alcohol conditioned place preference. So instead of getting morphine in the striped room, they get alcohol. Electrical current to that part of the brain in rats will block it. So a few small studies in humans exist for both alcohol and heroin and smoking. So what I have here are graphs related to a couple of patients for alcohol. So small groups of patients, we see that it reduces alcohol use. Small groups, it seems to improve heroin abstinence. Small groups of people, smoking cessation. It reduces craving. So that's what these graphs for the alcoholics represent. So we've got craving scores, we have thoughts about alcohol, we have drinking behavior, all of which are reduced when people have the surgery, the batteries turned on, and for the most part, there's suppression of their urges, drinking behavior. There's another experiment for a heroin user whose battery ran out, and right when the battery ran out, heroin using behavior went back up, and they replaced the battery, went back down, sort of a natural experiment. Now, none of these are placebo-controlled. These are all very small numbers, groups of 1 to maybe 6 patients. So we need further research to see about this. And there are some issues. So, first of all, it's a surgical device. And this is a surgical procedure putting electrodes in the brain. For injection drug users, this is really hazardous because any kind of hardware in the body, even if it's an artificial hip or an artificial knee or a heart valve, let's say, even drugs, you're at very high risk for getting infection in those devices. So imagine having a device in your brain. That's a pretty dangerous situation. So you have to engage in a risk-benefit scenario for doing this for people who are injection drug users. There's also a long and scary history of psychosurgery. An era of forced lobotomies in the 1950s. That's scary. Psychosurgery to control political dissent in China. We need to be worried about psychosurgery. Yes, it's not the same as surgery in the sense it's not permanent. You put these electrodes, the electrodes are permanent, but you could turn the battery off, and then it's like not having had the surgery, but it comes with some ethical consideration. It's very expensive. The surgery and the device is about $80,000. So it may be worth further pursuit and further understanding, but it's something that is being developed in a small scale. Perhaps something that will be a little bit easy to work with is something called transcranial magnetic stimulation. So again, electrical impulses are really what drives neuronal communication. And if you remember, probably from high school, that magnets and electricity kind of go hand in hand, and magnetic fields can alter instead of putting wires in the brain and directly applying electricity, you could create very focused magnetic fields that can be focused to specific areas of the brain. Might those then alter, for a brief period of time, the electrical current in neurons that would then affect how those neurons go on to function? And if you could target areas of the brain that influence addiction, then maybe these focused magnetic fields could work. Now, this is already clinically used for depression, but there have been a few experiments related to addiction, one in particular related to nicotine. So the problem with these kinds of things for addiction is the structures in the brain, the nucleus accumbens, that really play a major role in addiction, lie very deep in the brain. And a lot of magnetic forces can't make it too deep in the brain. They can kind of get motor cortex and more superficial parts of the brain. But there's a new kind of magnetic coil, and it fits like a hat around, and these would represent sort of magnetic bars that can penetrate. This shows how deep across the brain it penetrates. It can get even very deep structures of the brain where the areas that regulate addiction would be. So this technology can influence the right parts of the brain. The question is, does it work? Now we can at least see these are dopamine-related neurons and dopamine function. And when this focused magnetic impulse is provided, we can increase dopamine function in the targeted part of the brain. So again, if we can increase dopamine function in parts of the brain regulating addiction, perhaps we can influence addiction-related behavior. So when done for smokers, the people who got no magnetic stimulation, people who got small magnetic stimulation and then greater magnetic stimulation. This is their baseline function, and this is what happens after they had sessions of the transmagnetic stimulation. And this is just looking at the number of cigarettes they smoked. So as the magnetic current gets bigger, you see there's a dramatic reduction in the number of cigarettes smoked compared to the amount of cigarettes smoked per day prior to receiving this magnetic stimulation. So it does seem to help through time. And placed on a graph, number of cigarettes smoked daily decreases. Now, they did an interesting thing. They gave some people a cue, like a picture of cigarettes, something that would, remind people of smoking, when they also had the magnetic treatment, and some people didn't get that. And it seemed like if you had the cue, like the picture of cigarettes to remind you of cigarettes, at the same time you got the magnetic stimulation, you had a better impact of this treatment. And so this may be a non-invasive way, unlike putting electrodes in the brain, to help address addiction. Now, we don't know the frequency at which it would have to be done, how many sessions, how long lasting it would be, and it's only been used here for nicotine, but perhaps conceptually it could also be used for other drug addicts. And now into the last part of this lecture, looking at technologies you all have. So in the United States, 84% of adults use the internet. And if you go to that age range of 18 to 49, that goes up to 95%. What I was able to find about Vietnam is that basically 52% of the Vietnam population accesses the internet. And when we talk about smartphone use in the US, almost 2/3 of the US population have a smartphone. And again, if you're in that 18 to 49-year-old group, it goes up to 83%. And the people who do have smartphones, 62% have said that they've used their smartphone at some point in time to look up health-related information. So, I mean, it's a powerful tool. And there are almost 25 million smartphone users here in Vietnam. So can the smartphone and the internet be used to help prevent or treat addiction? Well, HIV prevention. So this was looking at HIV education, behavioral education on risk reduction, comparing two different strategies. These are all adolescent drug users. One group had 2 in-person behavioral sessions, where they're taught about risk reduction, common use, etc. And another group had no in-person behavioral education. It was all based on the web. They had 3 sessions, and it was directed and based on how they responded to one module of risk behavior would influence which one they got next. So the education would be tailored to their response. And when you compare pre-intervention knowledge about HIV risk behaviors to after the intervention, there was no difference between groups. People who got in-person educational training and those who just did it on the web. Similar knowledge, and both groups at least endorsed a similar level of, hey, now I know what to do behaviorally and feeling confident about risk reduction behavior. And so as much as I hate to threaten the employment of people who do HIV risk education behavior, there is the potential for self-directed, web-based HIV risk behavior interventions that could be done. Again, think of remote areas where it's hard for people to travel. This could be a successful way of increasing knowledge about HIV prevention. Well, similarly, in Vietnam, where often methadone clinics will only have 2 counselors for 450 patients. You can't realistically expect them to provide any form of meaningful counseling with that kind of caseload. What if the counseling could be replaced by or supplemented with internet-based intervention that, again, the intervention based on how someone responds is able to create self-tailored intervention. So this experiment compares methadone patients who get standard 1 hour weekly counseling face-to-face to people who only get half an hour of face-to-face counseling, but they get another half an hour of web-based counseling. It's all automated and self-directed based on how they respond. So it's a way of reducing the workload for the existing counselors. It's not a complete replacement, but it cuts the time in half. These people were randomized to these interventions and followed a year. And you could see that over the course of a year, there really wasn't a difference between retention and treatment. And if anything, when it comes to drug use, there was a slight improvement in those who had the web-based counseling rather than purely face-to-face counseling. So this may be another very readily available and realistic approach. There is now a further study going on to see if the web-based intervention can completely replace counseling. So instead of half face-to-face and half web-based, what if it's entirely web-based? And we'll see what the results of that look like. But at the very least, as a labor-saving form of intervention, and people who got the web-based were extremely satisfied with it because, again, the intervention would modify itself automatically based on how someone responded. So it was sort of self-tailoring. And Patients found that very satisfying. Now that's web-based. What about smartphone? So a study using a smartphone system, the addiction, basically HS, the Addiction Comprehensive Health Enhancement Support System. So just like if you go on your smartphone and you see all the different apps, so if you go into the app on your smartphone for HS, you see all of the different things you have your profile, your support team, there's something called the panic button. You can do surveys, so a survey might be how much craving do you have, what's your depression level. You could have the Kessler, you could have other types of surveys here. You can keep people informed of events. Hey, there is a sober party celebrating recovery and it's going to be in Dongda district on Saturday night. Come and have fun. You could have messages, so a counselor could send a text message to someone, or the patient could text message the counselor. Basic recovery information, you could have psychoeducation you could have here. Even podcasts about recovery, maybe relaxation strategies, stress reduction programs. Very exciting. And it's customizable. So you could create, just like you can on WhatsApp or other things, your chat group. So you could have other people you are in treatment with who you become friendly with, and you support each other through this app. It also has a GPS-enhanced service, and I think this is pretty exciting. So if you go into the settings, you can identify who your friends are, both sober and maybe your support network, your friends, not your drug-using friends, but the friends who want to help you stay sober. And if you wanted to push the panic button, they would automatically be notified they're having difficulty and might need their help, a strong craving or feeling like you might relapse. The GPS is pretty interesting. You could plug in a high-risk location. So let's say there's a hot spot for drugs. You could put that into the GPS, and automatically, if you enter in that neighborhood, a text message could go to your support network. A text message could go to your counselor, and they start texting you back saying, "Hey, what are you doing in that neighborhood? Call me. Let's talk about it." So, very interesting potential use. So this has been tried for alcohol. These are all people who went to a residential alcohol treatment program. And following that, they have treatment as usual for 12 months, or a group was randomized to the use of the smartphone app for 8 months. And then after 8 months, it was stopped, but they were followed for another 4 months to see how they did. The outcome measures were risky drinking days out of the last 30 days and total alcohol abstinence over the past 30 days. So the results are pretty interesting. So these are odds ratios. And we can see that, well, on top, these are raw numbers. So the top is just risky drinking days overall. And so in the last 30 days, people who had treatment as usual, they had 2.75 risky drinking days, and the people who had access to this app had significantly fewer risky days. The odds of abstinence at month 4 of the study, not much difference between the two groups, but as time goes on, at month 8 and month 12, there is a significant increase in the odds of being abstinent between those who have access to the smartphone app and those who do not. Now, there's a little bit of a dose response, so people get the app. How many apps do you have on your phone that you never use? Obviously, if you don't use it, it's not going to work. So of people who have the app, the app was accessed on 40% of the day. So maybe every other day someone at least did something with that. But it wasn't that they just opened it up once, because they could see how many pushes deeper into the app they went. Now, the more days you use the app, the more likely you were to be absent. So there's a dose effect. You use it, it works. Now, there was an indication that the more pages you viewed were linked with more at-risk drinking days. So that's probably responsive to people who are really struggling and needing help. They're really trying to use it more and more to overcome health problems. So that may not be surprising. So this may be an interesting avenue to look at for other drugs, whether it's heroin and everything. And then finally, things that are in development, wearable sensors. So we know that the smartphone has GPS. There's also a microphone. I mean, obviously you talk on it, you can record things. What if the microphone can detect changes in your speech pattern? Changes in your speech pattern that might be associated with periods of stress. And so maybe your smartphone could detect that you're stressed. We know that stress is linked to relapse. Maybe the smartphone can identify signs of relapse even before the patient is aware and can create a notification either to the patient or maybe their counselor. We know that there are wearable, like we have smartwatches, things that can monitor blood pressure, skin conductance, body temperature, oxygen saturation. Again, whether you're moving, whether you're sitting, what direction you're moving in, where you are. So imagine a situation where we have a device that detects an alteration in body temperature, an increase in blood pressure, an increase in heart rate without a change in location. So it's not because you're walking up a flight of stairs, it's not because you're running, it's not because you're exercising. Maybe it's because you just use the stimulant. And maybe the pattern of heart rate change, maybe there is a pattern that could be characteristic of drug use as opposed to other things that might increase your heart rate. And if those factors could be identified, then again, perhaps a signal could be transmitted to a counselor or to you as a patient to try to intervene. So there's strong potential for this. Now, on the flip side of it, it also comes with serious privacy and safety concerns. We would not want this to be a mechanism of the state that uses people to arrest them because they know they're in a hotspot, or they now, because the heart rate has gone up and they're stressing the voice, a strong indication that they're using drugs. I mean, there has to be some very strong ethical considerations, just like any form of big data that's available to us about consumer behavior or about actual behavior, even if some of that behavior is illegal behavior. So as exciting as some of these developments are, they really need to be thought through very carefully with strong protection for the patients, that these tools not be abused to invade privacy, not be used as a means of law enforcement, but really only be used as voluntary and therapeutic interventions. Potentially very exciting. So while I'm here, again, since 2009, there's been great developments in the world of addiction treatment. What I've showed you today, almost everything is quite experimental. A couple of things, like I said, the buprenorphine implants just approved last week. So these experimental developments are coming into a reality, many of them, for variants. I hope that some of the things I shared with you today, you will go back to your classroom and talk to your students, and maybe the next great invention and new technology for addiction will be a made in Vietnam technology that has been developed through your scientific programs here. Gene editing technology, genetic interventions, nanoparticles that are smart particles that could be delivered directly into areas of the brain or body where drugs function may be a possibility. The Internet of all things, there are enough IP addresses now to create an individual address for every square inch of the planet Earth, which then means you could have, there are smart glasses now in development that can tell you what liquid is in the glass. And maybe you can identify alcohol. It can tell you if the glass is standing upright or if it's been spilled. So that someone just overdose and fall down. There are potential technologies now to really intervene, prevent, and treat it. We need more research. We need strong ethical backing to develop these, and hopefully it will bring improvements not just here in Vietnam, but worldwide. So once again, I want to thank everyone from the PEPFAR team, everyone from the VAAC, everyone at the various PACs. I think now it's been 25 different provinces for me. I want to thank Dr. Madden, now that he's here, and Dr. Zhang, and the SAMHSA team. I look forward to returning for a brief while in September. I look forward to my ongoing NIDA-funded collaboration looking at drug-drug interactions between antiretroviral medications and methadone here with the HMU team. And see what the future holds in store for addiction prevention and treatment here in Vietnam. Thank you. Dr. Plum from PAC and Dr. Town from VAAC and everyone else for attending this lecture. This is perhaps a momentous lecture for me. I have been working on addiction workforce development to Vietnam since August 2009. And at that point, there were 3 MMT clinics in Vietnam, 3 in Ho Chi Minh City and 3 in Hai Phong. And between the 6 clinics, there were a total of 950 patients being treated with methadone. Now, there are more than 240 clinics and about 45,000 and it's through the hard work of all of the partner agencies and the leadership of the VAAC and the entire PEPFAR project that has made this a reality. And I've had the privilege of working with so many people over these years from the various organizations, FHI, 360, back when Dr. Tai was still with them, with the CDC, with USA, with SAMHSA, and the entire PEPFAR project, the medical universities here in Vietnam, especially Hanoi Medical University, working with Professor Hinh and of course Dr. Zhang and his team. And there's been an incredible level of work done over these last 7 years, and everyone should be extremely proud of the accomplishments made here to improve the citizenship of Vietnam. There are now 45,000 people who are not in compulsory treatment centers, which means they get to be with their families. They get to work. They get to be consumers and contribute to the economy rather than taking away from the economy either through crime or lost opportunity or the expense of having them in compulsory treatment centers. So this has been a great advance, and I feel very honored to have been part of it. My work with PEPFAR is coming to a formal end in September, although I hope that that doesn't mean my work in Vietnam is coming to a formal end, and I'll be able to continue to work with many of you over years to come. I look forward to watching this process.
So we can turn up the only we have to
Go closer.
Yeah, no close.
So I thought that as I reflect on the past 7 years that I spent coming here, it would be a good time to think about the future. And About the time that Hanoi Medical University was founded, this was the vision of education in the future. So in the early 1900s, cartoonists speculated that students would learn by having devices that could transform books or knowledge and go directly into the brain of the students. This was the vision of the year 2000, back about the time Hanoi Medical University was founded. As funny as the drawing looks, when we think about smartphones and Wikipedia and being able to Google, actually that vision isn't too far off. Knowledge and information is available so easily. So I want to give another vision of the future, of some developments related to addiction and its treatment. Some of these developments are experimental, and like all experiments, some will not work and we will never see them rise to the level of truly helping with human conditions. But I hope that by presenting these efforts, it will inspire some of you to develop your own ideas or to expand on these ideas and start developing novel interventions to address addictions here in Vietnam. The challenge that's been set forth in Vietnam and in the world for the treatment of HIV, which here in Vietnam is intricately linked with drug addiction, is the standard, the new standard of 90-90-90. This is an extremely challenging goal. I think the HIV clinic in my hospital in Minnesota is one of the best clinics in the country. We have some of the best results of any clinic in the country with a very challenging population. And we're sitting at about 86% viral suppression. So with one of the best clinics with all kinds of resources available, we have a difficult time achieving 90-90-90. Any ongoing challenges, so 90-90-90. What that means for those of you who haven't tried in the world is that 90% of all of those people who are infected with HIV will know that they're infected, because right now, more than half of the people who are walking around out there infected have never been tested and they don't know they're infected, which means they aren't getting treatment, which means they continue to engage in behaviors that will allow the virus to be transmitted. So we want the overwhelming majority of people who are infected to know that they're infected. And then of those who are infected, we want 90% of them to actually be getting treatment for that infection. And of those people who are being treated for the infection, we want 90% of them to have successful treatment, which means that the virus is fully suppressed. Because when we have a suppressed virus, that virus is extremely difficult, close to impossible to transmit. So if everyone who has HIV is virally suppressed, we can end this HIV epidemic by preventing further transmission, even when people continue to engage in risk behavior, because there's no more active virus to transmit. This is a really big challenge. So my colleagues, Charlet, Michel, out of France, through combined funding with NIH in the United States and NRS in France, are conducting the DRIVE study in Haiphong, looking at active injection drug users and hoping to engage them in treatment. But in a preliminary evaluation of 603 injection drug users in Haiphong, everyone got HIV tested, and they identified 152 individuals with HIV. Some of them had already known that they were HIV positive, but many of them didn't. So again, about half of the people who were HIV positive didn't know that they were positive. And then following the cascade of those who are positive, how many are engaged in treatment and receiving medication, and we should be entering to a point where anyone who is positive gets medication. The standards of creating medication initiation based on CD4 count, those days are over. If you're positive, you should get medication, regardless of your CD4 count. But when we look at the standards for the population of injection drug users in HIFON, HIV positive, you can see the cascade of those who are offered antiretroviral treatment and those ultimately who are suppressed. And of those who are receiving antiretroviral medication, 78% of them were virally suppressed. But if we apply the 90-90-90 standard, then actually it turns out only 37% of the population is suppressed. Because if there are 152 people who are HIV positive, we want 90% of them on treatment and suppressed. So it'll be much higher than the numbers on this graph. So there's a long ways to go here in Vietnam and elsewhere of reaching this 90-90-90 standard. So let's today, we're going to talk about some future developments. So we need new ways of treating HIV and new ways of addressing addiction if we're going to meet this goal of 90-90-90. Well, when it comes to the treatment of addiction, methadone started in 1964. Maintenance for buprenorphine began in 1985. These are incredibly successful therapies, and we should never throw out successes just because they're old, but they've been around for a long time. We need some new ways of addressing opiate addiction. And there are new ways of addressing addiction, and some of these don't even require medication. So I'm going to talk a little bit about new medication. I'm going to talk about some interesting biological approaches to addressing addiction, even some medical technology that can address addiction. And then some mobile health. How can we use the power of our smartphones to treat addiction? Again, not all of these therapies will end up being successful, but they're all in various levels of experimentation. And I think they provide some very interesting avenues for us to explore. Let me first start by talking about HIV. This is really going to be the last slide that I have on HIV, but it provides a model. So at the recent conference on retroviruses and other infections, preliminary results from the LATTE-2 study were presented. Now, what this study is this was a study of HIV-positive individuals who were all started on an oral antiretroviral regimen. So everyone was given pills for their HIV. And then of people who were suppressed from these pills, there were 3 randomized groups. One group continued to take pills. One group received experimental long-acting antiretroviral medication. So they received cabotegravir and rilpivirine had been turned into a nanoemulsion in nanoparticles, so it could be injected intramuscularly and gradually released through time. So one group received this injection every 4 weeks, and another group received this injection every 8 weeks. So they didn't have to take any pills at all. They just received injections. Groups were then tracked for ongoing viral suppression, because again, this was part of the experiment. Everyone was first suppressed on pills. One group kept taking the pills, and the other 2 groups got the different injections. And after following these groups, after a period of time of being on the injections or the pills, there was an ongoing equivalent level of viral suppression. People who continued to take the pills, 91% of them remained virally suppressed. But the people who got the monthly injection, 94% of them were virally suppressed. And the people who got the injection every 2 months, 95% of them were virally suppressed. So statistically, there was no difference between the people who had the pills and the people who had the injections. But you could see this is a potential opportunity when we struggle with issues of viral, antiretroviral adherence, getting to take pills, not coming to clinic. If you could receive an injection once every 2 months, you would no longer need to remember to take your pills. You wouldn't have the burdensome visits of going to the OPCs. And you can imagine how valuable this is in remote areas when it may be difficult for people to get to the OPCs. So this is extremely promising that once they're virally suppressed, they can continue injections only once a month or maybe even every other month and continue to be virally suppressed. Very exciting work that needs ongoing work. I'm not sure we'll get to a point where we could start someone with injections. I mean, again, everyone here started out on pills. But at least starting out on pills and then transitioning into injections may be a great option for you. So following along this line, there are a number of acting interventions for addiction medications. I think many of you have already heard about extended release naltrexone. Naltrexone is an opiate antagonist. It blocks the opiate receptors. It seems to work fairly well, perhaps not quite as well as methadone or buprenorphine, but still quite well. It can be given once every 4 weeks, so every 28 days there's injection. And when studied compared to placebo in Russia, getting an injection once a month over 6 months, about 57% of the population who got the injections were engaged in treatment and continued to participate after 6 months. And those who got the placebo, there was a significant drop-off in retention in that group. Everyone got behavioral treatment, but this provided a great example of a medication that can be delivered once a month, while people get behavioral treatment, and there was success at not only blocking the effects of heroin, but managing symptoms of craving. Well, just last week, the Food and Drug Administration in the United States approved a long-acting form of buprenorphine, a brand name Suboxone. There are 2 trials here in Vietnam of Suboxone, one in the Vo Doc Clinic in Ho Chi Minh City, and another, the Bravo trial, being conducted in 3 provinces here in the north. And currently, it's taken as a sublingual pill. So pills you put under your tongue every day or possibly every other day. But this new formulation that was approved last week in the United States are implants. There can be a small incision done on the inside of the arm, and these little implants, about the size of a matchstick, can be inserted under the skin, and then just 1 stitch to sew up the incision. And those little matchstick devices have enough buprenorphine on them that gets slowly released, that there are continuous levels of buprenorphine maintained in the blood for 6 months. So here's an intervention, long-acting, instead of having to come to clinic every day or every other day, potentially every 6 months. When this was studied, compared to a placebo, you can see the ongoing retention or treatment between the people who had the implants compared to the placebo was much greater. And these are the buprenorphine implants. placebo implant or standard oral, getting the pills under the tongue. And there's great effect on staying in treatment. So very few people who got placebo stayed in treatment. But the implant was comparable to getting the pills. Similarly, there was reductions in drug use. The cravings improved, and the patients rated themselves as having improved with this once every 6 months. Now, when this study was conducted, because they didn't know whether there would be a sufficient amount of buprenorphine, there were some allowances for patients as they needed it, continue to take some supplemental pills, but we could potentially, just like the HIV medication, transition to a level where we start people on pills. Once they're stabilized, convert the amount of pills that they're taking as a stable dose into a level of implant, and then give them those implants. And all they would have is every 6 months a need to come and have those implants taken out and new ones put back in. Now, we can't have medication like this be a 100% replacement and standalone for addiction treatment. There still needs to be counseling about what happens when you run into your friends and they invite you to go use drugs. We still need to be on the lookout for people who transition. Maybe they stop using heroin, but now they start using methamphetamine. So there will always be a need for counseling, but this could provide a very good means of addressing adherence and addressing that burden of people who have to come to clinic every day. You know, part of getting people engaged in addiction treatment is that they can get their lives back, which means that they can have a job, that they can even be promoted in their job. And the number of patients in methadone clinics that I've spoken to who've done just that, they've gotten a job, they've now been promoted, and they're promoted. A wonderful thing for them entails having to travel. And some patients have had to turn down their promotions because they are still required to show up at that methadone clinic every single day. They can't have methadone to take with them when they would go on a business trip that they've been able to get because they've been promoted from successful treatment of their addiction. Until takeout privileges are provided to patients, this may be another way to allow people to have their addiction treated and for them to be able to travel around the country or travel internationally and not have to worry about getting to a clinic every day to get their medication. So, like I said, this medication has been approved as of last week by the Food and Drug Administration in the United States. Now, another medication that's in development, it's in the final stage of clinical trials within the US and a few other countries. Another long-acting version of buprenorphine, but instead of it being an implant, it's an injection that's subcutaneous. So just under the skin, very simple. You don't have to worry about doing an incision under the skin and doing a stitch and taking things out every 6 months. This is just an injection, and it's coming in 2 different formulations right now. One is a once-a-week injection under the skin, and the other is once every 4-week injection under the skin. Now, I don't have clinical trial results yet that would compare addiction treatment outcome, but what I do have are some drug challenge study results. So these are people who were given these injections and then brought in once a week and given injections of hydromorphone. Hydromorphone is a very potent opiate, like heroin, very potent. And then the challenge is, do they feel that injection of the hydromorphone? If they do, then it's a sign that the buprenorphine is not lasting long enough to block the effect of the hydromorphone injections. If they don't feel the hydromorphone injection, then the buprenorphine is successfully being maintained at a blood level high enough to block the effects of opiates were they to use them. Imagine instead of hydromorphone, a patient who's taking this goes out, tries heroin, would they feel the effect of there. And so these are two groups of people. They get placebo hydromorphone, 6 milligram dose of hydromorphone, or an 18 milligram dose of hydromorphone, injected through time, once weekly. And this was the formulation where they received the once a month, not the once a week, but the once a month subcutaneous injection of buprenorphine. Everyone could feel the hydromorphone before they ever got the buprenorphine injection. Just the week before they got the buprenorphine injection, they were started on the buprenorphine pills. And so the buprenorphine pills dramatically reduced whether they could feel the hydromorphone. But now we're looking at 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. These are the number of weeks after they're getting a once a month subcutaneous injection. And every week they're getting each of these 3 shots. Placebo, 6 milligrams hydromorphone, or 18 milligrams hydromorphone. And you could see that basically no one is feeling these injections. So this successfully is blocking the effect of hydromorphone. So the clinical trials right now of actually treating drug addicts and following them to see are they retained in treatment, drop out, and following their urine drug screens to see if they're using drugs are currently being conducted, and hopefully we will have those results later this year, and that this will be another long-acting medication to treat addiction that will be available soon and will be easy to use because it's just a subcutaneous injection rather than an implant. So switching gears and shying away from long-acting medications to treat opiate addiction, I'm going to start talking about some pretty interesting biological interventions, and not just for opiate addiction. So cocaine, and I know that there's not a lot of cocaine here in Vietnam, although in the South it's starting to increase. And when we surveyed patients here in Hanoi, in the OPCs, I think about 12% of the patients had said that they had tried cocaine. So it exists here, but certainly not as much as methamphetamine. Well, cocaine is derived from a plant. And like all plants, there's a root system in the dirt. And right around these roots are many different kinds of bacteria that grow. And there are a couple of bacteria, a Rhodococcus species and a Strenotrophomonas species, that are able to live very close to the root of the cocaine plant. Well, the plant that cocaine comes from has cocaine. So these bacteria need to be able to survive in that environment. And they've evolved and adapted to be able to survive in that environment by developing an enzyme in them that can degrade cocaine. And so this enzyme has been isolated, it's been characterized, we know the protein sequence of it, and this enzyme has been further altered in the laboratory to make it bind to cocaine even stronger than the naturally occurring enzyme, and it's been altered in a way to help it last for a long period of time. So when used experimentally, this is a fascinating experiment that I'm going to show you. So this top graph, these are rats that have been given a lethal dose of cocaine. This is a dose of cocaine that's so big that it will kill them. What happens is they develop seizures and they go into complete cardiovascular collapse. So their mean arterial pressure goes down and down and they die. So in this study, all the rats are given lethal doses of cocaine, doses of cocaine that we know will kill 100% of them. But half of the rats are given placebo, and half the rats are given this modified enzyme after the lethal dose of cocaine has been injected. You can see what happens. Though everyone, because everyone is getting the lethal dose of cocaine, the mean arterial blood pressure starts going up. They're going to head into seizures. In fact, they start developing seizures, and then half the group is given the enzyme. And the enzyme acts so quickly that it degrades all of the cocaine, and blood sugar goes back to normal. The seizures are stopped, and all of the rats continue to live. And those that got placebo, the seizures develop, the cardiovascular system collapses, and 100% of them die. This is a dramatic treatment. This enzyme-based treatment that you could imagine being used in an emergency room if someone were experiencing the toxic effects of cocaine. Absolutely traumatic. Well, there's been even further refinements of this enzyme to make it last for a very long time. So perhaps it could be used not just to treat toxicity, but could be used as a treatment for cocaine addiction, where someone could take this enzyme regularly and there would be maintained blood levels to allow any cocaine that a person might use to be degraded before it would get into the brain and result in pleasure. One means of trying to deliver this enzyme has also been developed, which is to attach the sequence that creates this enzyme to an adenovirus and basically infect people with it, and the adenovirus will continue to produce a long-acting enzyme. Now, this has not been tried in human beings, but I can show you results from rodents. So the top, as I said, the top graph shows that the enzyme can reverse a lethal dose of cocaine. What we now see in the bottom, or in the middle graph, are the locomotor effects. So cocaine is a stimulant and initially can cause humans to move a lot more. Just like humans, it's a stimulant. And different doses of cocaine produce greater and greater amounts of locomotion, stimulation. So these are all controls. They didn't get any of the enzyme. And as the dose of cocaine gets bigger, they move a lot more because it's a stimulant. Those rodents that got the enzyme delivered through an adenovirus, even as the dose of cocaine gets bigger, they have no more increase in their locomotion than what is saline. They're just walking around normally, like a rat that never got cocaine. So this enzyme is working. In a further experiment, now that's just an investigator giving a rat a shot of cocaine and seeing if the rat starts walking around him. The next experiment is to see whether rats will develop self-administration. What that means is they're given access to cocaine, and if they press a button, they get cocaine. If they press it again, they get cocaine. And they learn, just like humans, to keep giving themselves more cocaine because it feels good. They like it. It's reinforcing. And rodents will learn, just like humans, to continue to give themselves pain when they have the opportunity. In this experiment, half of the rodents got a placebo, so an adenovirus infection with no enzyme sequence attached, and half got it with the enzyme sequence attached. And eventually, all of the rodents that got the placebo learn how to push a button to give themselves cocaine. And cocaine gets to their brain, it's reinforcing, it's rewarding, they like it, they learn how to keep giving it to themselves. none of the rodents who get the adenovirus infection with the enzyme learn to give themselves cocaine. Because the cocaine is being metabolized so quickly, it doesn't get to the brain fast enough to produce the reward, which is the forcing part that makes them want to keep using it. So again, not done in humans yet, but it shows a promising direction for treatments for cocaine. Another way of harnessing biological therapies for addiction is actually to develop vaccines. So remember, drugs are measurable because they get to the brain. If we could prevent those drugs from getting to the brain, then they wouldn't have the reinforcing properties. Now, all of the drugs that humans use are very small molecules. The immune system doesn't recognize these molecules. They're too small. But parts of these molecules can be attached in a laboratory to proteins we know the immune system recognizes. And so if the immune system goes to that protein that it recognizes and sees part of the molecular structure of the drug, then that could stimulate the immune system to recognize that part of the drug. And once the immune system recognizes it, then ongoing into the future, when that drug is used, even though it's a small molecule, the immune system has already created antibodies that will attach to that drug. And when an antibody is attached to a drug, antibodies are too big to cross the blood-brain barrier. So if the drug is attached to an antibody, that drug doesn't get into the brain, which then means it can't produce its rewarding effect and it can't produce the reinforcing effect. So just, as a cartoon, if someone gives themselves drug, these black dots, it goes through the blood circulation and crosses the blood-brain barrier and produces reward. But again, if you can get the immune system to recognize the drug by attaching the drug to a protein, and then antibodies are made to the drug, when the drug gets into the bloodstream, the antibody attaches to it, and this big antibody-drug complex can't make it across the blood-brain barrier. No drug in the blood. Now, these have been developed, and some of them have been tried in humans. So let me describe a couple of them. The one that made the furthest progression, actually developed by my colleague at Hennepin County Medical Center, so Paul Pentel, created a vaccine for nicotine. And remember, tobacco addiction is the largest preventable cause of death on the planet. And I know everyone talks about heroin addiction here and even methamphetamine, but the reality is that smoking will kill more people in Vietnam than heroin, methamphetamine, and HIV combined. So, incredibly important to address nicotine addiction. Well, a vaccine, they did all the preclinical experiments. You can block nicotine getting into the brain of rodents through this. The same kind of self-administration where rodents press a button to get nicotine. Well, the vaccine can prevent that. So I'm skipping ahead to a human study. So these are all pretty heavy smokers. They are people who are smoking on average 24 cigarettes a day. The Fagerstrom score, which is a measure of the severity of nicotine dependence, is 6, which is a strong indicator of nicotine dependence. 95% of these study participants had tried to quit smoking in the past but failed. These are addicted people. They are addicted to nicotine. And they received monthly injections of a nicotine vaccine and then were followed. Well, one initial concern was that if the antibody binds to the nicotine and prevents it from getting to the brain, will people just try to smoke even more cigarettes to overcome it? And there was no change in smoking behavior. They didn't try to inhale deeper or stronger or smoke more cigarettes to overcome it. So that's the good news. The bad news is that everyone has a difference in their immune system, and not everyone responded to the vaccine with a strong antibody response. And so there were some differences. So they tried doing an analysis basing the evaluation on those who had a strong immune response and developed a lot of antibodies, compared to those who, even when they got vaccinated, their immune system just didn't create a lot of antibodies. And when you split based on that, people who had a higher antibody response were more likely at the end of the year to have quit smoking than those who had a lower antibody response or those who just got placebo. Now, the response wasn't as great as we would like it to see. I mean, this is 35% of people quitting, but it's a proof of concept that if we can stimulate the immune system to make a high enough level of antibody, that we can successfully block the effect of nicotine getting into the brain, which will reduce people's drive for smoking, because the reinforcing effect of smoking is blocked. Nicotine's no longer getting into the brain. So this next generation of nicotine vaccines, which will produce a stronger immune response, are currently in development. Now that's developed for cocaine. And these two have been used in humans, but in smaller trials. The first trial was actually done in methadone patients who were using cocaine. As with the nicotine vaccine, there was a wide variation in immune response. So this actually charts it out. This graph shows the amount of antibody produced, and each line presents a different person in the study. So you could see some people had very strong antibody response, others had very weak antibody response. And so the effect of using cocaine is going to be different based on your immune response. But there was so much variation in this that ultimately in a small trial looking at urine drug screening in these cocaine-using patients, those with a high antibody response versus a low antibody response, so high, low, and percent of drugs that are negative, not much of a difference. So this cocaine vaccine, while conceptually was strong, and people, for the most part, said it could reduce the way the cocaine made them feel, at least in this double-blind trial, two different double-blind trials, did not show a strong clinical effect. So again, we need second-generation vaccines, maybe that can create a greater antibody titer, and there may, with those refinements, be a more successful vaccine. Now, not in humans yet, but in rodents, is a vaccine for methamphetamine. And similarly, a vaccine to methamphetamine will slow methamphetamine's access to the brain. And at least in rodents, it can prevent something called conditioned place preference. So if you, roughly describing it, give a methamphetamine injection to a rat in a room whose walls are striped, and you give a placebo injection to the rat in a room whose walls have polka dots, and then you let the rat choose which room do they want to spend more time in. They tend to spend time in the room that felt good to them. Something good and pleasurable occurred when they got methamphetamine, so they spend more time in the striped room. So using that kind of experimental design, rats who received the methamphetamine vaccine, we were able, people who did this experiment, were able to block that form of preference, where the rats really didn't spend any more time in the room where they got the methamphetamine than they did in the room where they got placebo. So it was able to block something called conditioned place preference. And in rodents who developed conditioned place preference and then were not given cocaine anymore, and then or methamphetamine anymore, and sometime later given another injection of methamphetamine to see if there would be a return to this preference of the, say, the striped room over the polka dot room. The vaccine prevented that return even after a period of time of not getting methamphetamine. So it's promising, at least in rats. We need to move it into humans and do some experiments to see, one, will it produce a strong enough antibody titer that it could be a successful therapy, or will it have the same issues that the cocaine and the nicotine vaccine had, where there's this wide variation in antibody response, which then limits its clinical utility. So this is something in development that hopefully will make it into humans relatively soon, at least for a clinical trial. And then heroin vaccine. So there have been vaccines for heroin. Now heroin is a little bit more complicated because heroin gets metabolized into morphine. So the question is, should you have a vaccine against heroin or a vaccine against morphine? Or maybe you need a vaccine that covers both. So this is an experiment where it's a vaccine against heroin paired to a vaccine against morphine. And then rodents are given heroin in one condition and morphine in another to see how the vaccines do. And it's that same kind of experiment where you have a striped room and a polka dot room, and do they spend more time in the room where they got the heroin because of the good memory of it? Or is the vaccine enough to block the pleasure experienced in the striped room? They don't see any difference between how they felt in the striped room versus the polka dot room. And indeed, this experiment works, but there's an interesting point to it. So this is, again, remember, to make the vaccine, you have to attach the heroin or the drug to a protein that the immune system will recognize. So that's just what this KLH stands for. That's linker protein that would be attached to heroin. But one group of rats only got the linker protein, and one group of rats got the heroin vaccine, and another group got the morphine vaccine. All of the groups did the same when they were given injections of placebo. They had no preference for the striped room versus the polka dot room. When the groups were given heroin, of course, the rodents that didn't get the real vaccine spent more time in the room where they got the heroin. They liked it. Of those rodents that got the heroin vaccine, when they received injections of heroin, no difference. They didn't spend any added time in that room. Those rodents who were given the heroin vaccine but given injections of morphine responded to morphine. They liked the morphine and spent time in the morphine side of the room. Interestingly, when the experiment was done and people got morphine, again, morphine felt good to the rats that got the fake vaccine, but the heroin vaccine was also able to block the morphine. The morphine vaccine blocked the morphine too. But I think what this tells us is any vaccine development for heroin needs to be a heroin vaccine, not a vaccine for morphine. Because here you can see the morphine vaccine didn't help for heroin. So that's spending more time in one room versus the other. Then there are experiments looking at what happens when the vaccine is given in rats who are used to getting heroin and have developed preference and have learned to push a button to get heroin. You can get all the rodents to learn how to press a button to get heroin. And then what you can do is, after they learn to do that, you stop giving them heroin. They go basically through withdrawal. Then you can give them an injection of placebo and nothing happens. Or you can give them a little dose of heroin to see if that cues their memory to say, oh, that feels good. I remember what that feels like. I'm going to start pushing the button again. And the heroin vaccine does a pretty good job at preventing that. It doesn't block it 100%, but it does a pretty good job at reducing a return to pushing the button to get heroin. So you could think of it like running into friends trying heroin and maybe trying it once but not continuing to try it thereafter. So at least in rodents, there's some promise that this may be an effective route of inaction for heroin addiction. Now the challenge is, during social stress, so they gave these rats stresses. Some were chemical stresses, some were stresses related to signals that would remind them of heroin. And when given those signals, they all started pushing the button again. So the vaccine has its limitations. And people would still need behavioral counseling regarding things like it's Tet and it's a holiday and you're celebrating, and the vaccine isn't going to prevent that kind of craving that would lead someone to use heroin, but it might reduce the amount of heroin that they use, should they use it, and the length of time that they would use it for, because the heroin is not adequately getting into the brain. So, at least for heroin, the other challenge is we have very good treatments. We have methadone, we have buprenorphine, we have naltrexone. So any vaccine would perform at least as well as already existing therapies to be adopted. For things like methamphetamine, cocaine, and nicotine, we either don't have effective medications or the medications for nicotine don't work as well as we'd like them to. So developing any kind of medication that can work better than placebo is a great advance for it. So these are some directions developing vaccines. Some of them used in humans, some yet to be used in humans. And if we're going to see these used more universally, we need to have better immune response and ways of predicting immune response of individuals. So it means designing a better vaccine. The immune system, like many of the vaccines we get, our tetanus vaccine, you have to get it every 10 years. So, these vaccines you might need to get a month. That's a burden on patients. There is always concern. Will someone try to use a really large dose of the drug to overcome the amount of antibody? We don't know. There was at least one patient in the cocaine trial who tried it and did not experience any adverse effects, but we have to think about that. The antibody blocks the drug from getting into the brain, but some drug is still available in the peripheral system. So again, we have to worry about potential cardiac effects of stimulants. The antibody binds much of it, but there still might be some available for peripheral toxicity. So these things have yet to be worked out in further experiments. Now I'm going to change gears once more and start talking about medical technology. So Minnesota, where I live, is a big developer of medical technology. So Medtronic, one of the major developers of pacemakers, St. Jude's, another major developer of cardiac valves and other devices are all in my city. So we're very big on medical technology. And so some of you may be familiar with deep brain stimulation. It's already approved for diseases like Parkinson's disease, and potentially it could be used to treat addiction. And the idea is, we know that there are parts of the brain that affect the production of addiction, where drugs act to produce reward, to produce the reinforcing effects. Now, we all talk about neurotransmitters, dopamine in particular as being part of this, but really what's happening when there are neurotransmitters being released is it alters the action potential of the neuron to trigger a neuron signal. Well, action potential is just the difference between positive charge and negative charge on the inside of the neuron versus the outside of the neuron. It's basically electricity. That's what's happening when neurotransmitters are causing neurons to become active. And so you can apply electrical current to parts of the brain. I mean, Mark Penfeld did this in Montreal in the 1950s. You stimulate with electricity a part of the brain in the motor cortex, and you can watch a patient's finger wiggle. Well, same concept. Apply electricity to the parts of the brain that influence addiction. And indeed, you can do experiments where instead of a rat pushing a button to get heroin, if you have that electrode in the part of the brain that produces reward, a rat will push a button to get that electric current, just as if it were a drug. Well, imagine if you could use electrical current to block the effect of reward or to block the process of craving to prevent drug use. So we know that an animal will push a button to get electrical charges delivered to their nucleus accumbens, a major part of reward and behavioral reinforcement for drugs. So can we, basically like a pacemaker, put electrodes into that part of the brain and disrupt the effect? And so you can take electrodes, you basically have a battery here, just like you would a heart pacemaker, and the electrodes get tunneled and a little hole is drilled in the skull, and they're directed into parts of the brain that have to do with addiction. And the battery, like a pacemaker, applies electrical charge on a regular basis. Now, this has been done in humans in very small experiments.